Good evening and welcome to Tucker Carlson Tonight. Last night we played you our interview with President Trump from Helsinki. Part of that interview has made headlines today. People are upset about it. It has nothing, by the way, to do with Vladimir Putin or Mother Russia. It has to do with the nation of Montenegro, which, by the way, is smaller than the state of Connecticut. Montenegro has fewer residents than the District of Columbia. It's a relatively poor place. It has no critical natural resources and limited strategic significance. Few Americans could find it on a map or name its capital or its president. That's not a slur against Montenegro. Apparently, it's a nice place, but those are the facts about Montenegro. From an American perspective, it's not an important country. And yet suddenly, because of an act of Congress that few people noticed, Montenegro has profound significance to every American. Since last year, Montenegro has been a member of the NATO alliance. That means that if Montenegro ever finds itself in a war, our military is pledged to defend it. That's called a defense guarantee. Defense guarantees don't seem like a big deal until suddenly they are. That's how the First World War started. 37 million casualties later, the world began to rethink the wisdom of treaties like that. But the lesson seems to have been lost since. In our interview with President Trump in Finland, we thought it might be worth having a conversation, or starting one, about America's obligations to NATO. So we asked a simple question. Why is it in our interest to defend the territorial integrity of Montenegro? Why should our soldiers fight and die on its behalf? Here's the exchange we had. So membership in NATO obligates the members to defend any other member that's attacked. So let's say Montenegro, which joined last year, is attacked. Right. Why should my son go to Montenegro to defend it from attack? Why is that? I understand
what you're saying. I've asked the same question. You know, Montenegro is a tiny country with very strong people.
Yeah, I'm not against Montenegro or Albania.
No, by the way, they're very strong people. They're very aggressive people. They may get aggressive, and congratulations, you're in World War III. Now, I understand that, but that's the way it was set up.
So that's not a definitive answer, obviously, but the president clearly had been thinking about it, and good for him. Presidents are supposed to wonder about things like that. Serious countries ought to have debates like that. The U.S. has to defend Montenegro? Really? Why is that? Is there a good reason? Let's hear it. That's the conversation we should be having. But the guardians of our public conversation are not serious people. They are hacks and buffoons. For wondering about our defense guarantee with Montenegro, Trump is being denounced for treason. For asking the question, we're accused of taking orders from Vladimir Putin. What do the Russians have on Tucker Carlson? Asked longtime CNN star Kathy Griffin. Her former network did an entire segment this afternoon suggesting that Americans somehow have some sort of moral obligation to lay down their lives for Montenegro. Here's part of it.
Yet again raising serious doubts about whether he would honor Article 5 of the NATO Charter if it came down to it. It's a cornerstone of the alliance. An armed attack on one nation is an attack on all. This time the president questioned whether the United States should honor its agreement when it comes to NATO's newest member, Montenegro.
So the argument apparently is that because Montenegro has about 20 non-combatants in Afghanistan right now, we, the U.S., has an eternal obligation to spend American money and lives defending Montenegro's borders. That is idiotic, which is to say perfect for cable news. In real life, a defense guarantee is not something you'd enter into lightly. It's like promising a friend to take care of his kids if he dies. It's a solemn commitment, and you would not make it unless you planned to keep it. So the question is, do we plan to keep it? Do we really plan to defend Montenegro? Or many of the other NATO members? How about Estonia? How about Slovakia? You ready to have your kids die in those countries? The U.S. government is ready to send them. We've promised to do that. NATO was created almost 70 years ago for a specific and noble purpose, keeping the Soviets from invading Western Europe. It worked, thank God. But the Soviet Union no longer exists, and it hasn't existed for almost 30 years. NATO, meanwhile, is still around, and it's getting bigger. Why is that? And more to the point, is it serving America's interests, or is it imperiling them? Those are vital questions. Official Washington does not want to answer them or talk about them. They're trying to crush anyone who asks. We are not intimidated, obviously. Joining us tonight is Philippe Reines, the former Hillary Clinton spokesman. Earlier today, he suggested we were working for Vladimir Putin for daring to ask about NATO and Montenegro. So it's a really serious question, because defense guarantees are serious promises. Why would the United States promise to defend Montenegro?
Well, The NATO treaty has kept the peace since World War II. I don't want your son to fight in Montenegro. I don't want your son to fight in Germany or any other of the 29 NATO countries. But you are presenting NATO as something likely to trigger a war, when NATO, in fact, has been what has avoided war. And while the Soviet Union has fallen, the Russians are incredible. And I know when I say Russians,
hold on. The reason I brought up Montenegro, and you suggested there was some Putin-related reason that I did, but there was a much more prosaic, obvious reason for bringing it up, which is it just joined NATO.
Yeah.
And
so at what level is a country not big enough to fight for? And let's also remember.
Well, I don't know. What's the American interest that would be preserved by sending my son to go fight in Montenegro? It's a serious question.
I saw your interview last night, and
what's the answer? Speak slowly so I can understand.
The answer is NATO and the collective defense, as it's called, which you know, is the most likely thing to keep the peace than not.
But let's say if there's no peace, but hold on, let's say that Russia moves against Montenegro. I'm not hoping for that. I hope they don't, but they might. Why would a critical American interest be served in going to war over that?
At what point is a country big enough?
Well, how about this point? How about Montenegro? I mean, that's why I gave a very specific example.
Well, you diminished their contribution to Afghanistan.
I'm not attacking them. I think it's great that they've got 20 non-combatants in Afghanistan, I guess. Actually, I feel sorry for them. I don't think we should have.
Well, they've contributed even before NATO.
That's great. But that's not the point. Are you suggesting that we owe them a defense guarantee because they're participating in Afghanistan?
I'm not looking at Montenegro itself. I'm looking at the full 29 countries that make up NATO.
That's how bad decisions get made, when people don't look at the specifics. That's why I am looking at the specifics.
Well, here are the specifics. How many times has the collective triggered?
Okay, once.
Once, and when was that?
It was after 9/11,
and it was a sign of solidarity.
I think it's great.
It's never happened.
This is not 9/11.
I think
the World War.
This is not Archduke Ferdinand.
Actually happened.
I know
it's not. It's merely look. The fact is that we are obligated to defend all these countries: Slovakia, Albania, Turkey. What would happen if Israel attacked Turkey? That's not a crazy possibility. You could easily see a terror group, Hamas, whatever, backed by Turkey. Israel retaliates. Suddenly, we're obligated to attack Israel? How would that work?
It's not every time anyone fires a shot at anyone else that we go to war.
But
otherwise, we would have been in 18 wars in the last 50 years.
Could you imagine a scenario where I easily could.
No.
Really?
We would never be in a shooting war with Israel.
Of course we wouldn't be. But under the terms of Article 5, you could see an obligation.
But the terms have never been triggered because the point of the terms are to keep the peace, and it has been successful.
Okay, but
is Montenegro the tipping point between NATO working and not?
Here's just a newsflash.
Yep.
The intent of something is not always consistent with the result of it. In other words, we do things hoping for one outcome and very often get an entirely different outcome. And that's why we need to enlarge our minds and imagine what could happen when we start making reckless.
But we didn't just create NATO yesterday.
No, we didn't.
We created NATO decades ago, and we know the history.
So what's the point? What is? I mean, let's be really specific. So NATO was created to keep the Soviets from invading Western.
NATO, the original NATO, which I believe was 12 countries, was to keep the Soviet Union in check.
Correct. That's right. From invading Western Europe. Great goal.
Which, by the way, has worked really well.
Amen. I totally agree.
Europe was war-torn since the beginning of Europe.
Couldn't agree more. I love NATO. I grew up loving NATO.
Something is working.
Okay.
Something got us through the Cold War.
But the world has completely changed. So maybe the people in Washington are so ossified and dumb, which is true, that they're failing to account for the total realignment of everything. The world is completely different from what it was in August of '91 when the Soviet Union disappeared.
So are you saying that Montenegro shouldn't be part of it, or NATO should stop?
I'm saying
we should pull out of NATO.
I'm not saying we should pull out of NATO. I'm saying we should have an adult conversation.
I don't know who number 28 was, but
but you're making impossible with reckless charges of treason the conversation America needs, which is, what is the point of this? Is the main adversary we face in the world stage
I don't
Russia?
believe Donald Trump bumping into the president of Montenegro several months ago was any kind of coded
How far does this go? I mean, like, what is the point?
I think people picked up on it because there was only a 1 in 28 chance of picking Montenegro.
But what you're doing
but
is
that's not the point.
Like, I watch these other channels and they're like, Trump this, Trump that. It's like, actually, every American voting for Trump or not has an interest in answering the question, what's the point of this? And no one can answer the question.
That's not true. I'm trying to answer the question, which is NATO has been part of our own defense. It is not.
You're giving me a history lesson. I want to know about
But the history is relative. I mean, if you don't learn from history.
So they're going to prevent Russia from doing what? Russia is.
I know you hate when I say it, but Russia is being aggressive. I won't say a word about the election. Russia is being aggressive again. Russia is being aggressive militarily.
So let's say they took
Russian bombers are buzzing us over Alaska. We have Russian ships and airplanes
but NATO
menacing
hasn't prevented any of that. It's kind of
How
weird.
do you know?
I don't know. You're saying that Russia's. So bottom line.
Maybe they're incredibly afraid of the Montenegrins.
But maybe if Russia were to invade one of these countries, do you think, very simple question, it would be worth your neighbors, my kids, going to fight Russia for the sake of the territorial integrity of this country?
I don't want to be the Dem that just repeats myself 4 times, but I firmly believe that it is NATO that has prevented that. In 4 years of the State NATO 4 times in Belgium. I understand.
Look, NATO's, again, you should be a history teacher. I'm just asking, like, how about tomorrow this happens? Don't you think America
But there have been
what
events.
percentage of Americans think they want their kids to die defending Slovakia? Seriously, big percentage, would you say?
I don't know. I know that I just outside met Leo and Michelle from Atlanta, Georgia. They're a big fan of yours, and I think that they understand that NATO is important. They might understand why Montenegro,
they think
and they might agree that there's a Montenegro meltdown.
But outside all the dumb people working in nonprofits, the think tank people in charge of our foreign policy who literally are responsible for wrecking the world, outside that group of people, does anybody think it's worth dying for Slovakia? Not one person.
Well, I think people are enjoying the freedom that has been provided without having to spend too much time worrying about how it's come, which is the American way that it should be.
Philippe, good to see you.
It is good to be back.
Thank you. Lou Dobbs, host, of course, Lou Dobbs tonight on Fox Business, one of the wisest people on television. He joins us tonight. Do you think, Lou, America's obligation to defend the territorial integrity of Montenegro?
I think that the president is not getting the credit he deserves for raising the issue of realigning NATO, because as you worry about whether we will defend NATO, it seems to be the reaction, at least of Philip, that NATO has saved the Western civilization. It's really an odd discussion to me in this respect, if I may say, Tucker. The President of the United States is the one who, in his campaign, started talking about reorienting NATO, talking about the fact you talked about Washington being ossified and dumb. This is a president who came in with bright ideas, who is attacked from every element of the establishment and those who are invested deeply in the status quo, including NATO. But the reality is that as we watch cable television today, the folks you were talking about on CNN are really neocons of casual convenience.
Exactly.
They are just thrilled to be talking about the United States defending the poor folks of Montenegro against the onslaught of mad Russians. This is beyond the pale. And the fact is, the real answer lies in we have a president who saw all of this years ago, who is driving this discussion because he can't get Congress, he can't get through the national media to the important issues. What is NATO doing? Why are they expanding to 29 nations, many of them small, and whether small or large, not particularly responsible in meeting the demands that are required of 2% of GDP for defense spending? We are actually being called upon to defend all of NATO, irrespective of the money they pay or their own fighting capabilities.
Because we deserve it. We have an altruistic obligation to only act when it's not in our interest. Have you ever noticed that they're very enthusiastic for war, but never wars that might actually benefit the United States? Ever. Any war that we might actually have an interest in, no, can't do that, because we're bad.
You've put it perfectly. We are compelled by some mysterious force to be altruistic, to act even against our own national interests. One could argue that invading Iraq, as the president has pointed out, and losing all of those lives and losing all of that money in the trillions was not in our interest, because really we didn't do much with the people, both in Saudi Arabia and Afghanistan, who were responsible for September 11th, and that was the incipient point of the conflict. It is difficult for some to remember. But the president has put it straightforwardly. He wants rationality. He wants things to make sense. He has talked endlessly over the last 2 years, to sometimes no avail, that we need smart government. We need smart people in government. We need brains. We need verb. And we need people committed to changing this status quo that could strangle this country as well as Western Europe if we're not careful.
Give me a war that protects America, and I'll support it. The others,
amen,
we're
brother.
Supporting. Lou, great to see you. Thank you.
Great to see you.
Sexist, racist, traitor, Nazi. The left is running out of epithets for the president. What's next? You know what's next. Physical action. We'll break that down after the break. First, he was a sexist, then a racist, then a Nazi, literally Hitler reborn. Now he's a traitor to his country. The left has run out of possible verbal attacks on President Trump. There are none left. All that's left is violence, and some on the left appear to be encouraging that. Progressives have graduated from rhetoric to physical action. For example, congressional candidate Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is calling on progressives to occupy airports and ICE offices to shut down immigration enforcement and keep people from doing their jobs, and people from flying on airplanes, for that matter. Former Hillary Clinton aide Philippe Reines, who was just in our previous segment, has brought air horns to the White House in an attempt to keep the president and his family from sleeping. Congresswoman Maxine Waters of Los Angeles wants Trump administration officials harassed whenever they dare go out into public. And plenty of regular people seem to be on board with that. That shouldn't surprise you. They have been told for months by the press and by progressive leaders that the president is a Nazi secret agent working for our greatest enemy, Vladimir Putin. If you really believed that, what wouldn't you do? Why wouldn't you use violence to save your country? You probably would. Things might get worse from here. The weather is getting hotter. We've got 6 weeks to go until September. The midterms are getting closer. Harassment and occupation could easily turn into something far worse. You know what we're talking about. People are being primed for that. And the left is recklessly egging it on. And they're not even doing it on behalf of the interests of Americans, but literally for the sake of foreigners. The Montenegrins you must be ready to die for some reason. The illegal immigrants who apparently now have a God-given right to enter this country. Nobody on the left is occupying Purdue Pharma to protest the opioid epidemic. The tens of thousands of people killed by opioids last year were mostly born in America. They don't help big business or get Democrats elected, so they don't matter. Congressman Eric Swalwell represents California, and he joins us tonight. Congressman, what's the penalty for treason?
Tucker, good evening. You know, the penalty that we are all paying right now for the president's treason is we are losing our allies. We see a wrecking ball threatening our freedoms here at home. And by the president's own definition of treason, Tucker, let's just use that.
What's your definition of treason?
Betrayal of the American people.
But treason's a capital offense.
Why doesn't his definition matter? He's the president. He said that Democrats committed treason when we didn't.
Congress.
I'm telling you, he's the president. He said Democrats committed treason when we didn't stand up for him at the State of the Union. His conduct in Helsinki was beyond that. Is treason.
So treason is punishable by death. It's an actual crime, and I think you're an attorney. You would know that. So when you tell your constituents that the President of the United States has committed a death penalty offense, are you concerned that maybe, just possibly, you're torquing up the rhetoric past the point of reasonable conversation?
No, I'm saying that the president, by his own definition,
don't blame the president. Don't blame.
Oh, he has a lot to be blamed for.
It's not your job to take the president's definition. You're an elected official. Hold on, slow down. I want to know what you think. If I just interviewed Trump, if I want to know what he thinks, I'll ask him. I want to know what you think. You're accusing the president of a capital offense. Why wouldn't it be more useful for the rest of us to explain specifically the policies that you disagree with, and we could have a debate on them? If you think the United States has an obligation to defend NATO members, tell us why. Instead, he's a treasonous Nazi. You think it's helpful?
Oh, I didn't call him a Nazi, Tucker, but why don't you have a problem that the President of the United States wants to turn over an innocent U.S. ambassador to the Russians? Don't you have a problem? Like, do we draw a line somewhere? Do we want to hear the transcript?
I have a problem with a lot of things the president has said. But I'm asking you, who is one of the people accusing the president of treason, if that's helpful.
Yeah.
I mean, is that the kind of rhetoric, again, as an elected official, that you think spurs thoughtful constructive conversation that brings the country together, or does it whip the morons into a frenzy and increase the likelihood of violence? Well, honestly, give me a real answer.
Yeah, I think this is a beautiful country that has always added freedoms, and we have a wrecking ball president right now.
Don't give me the stupid talking points.
No, he's working.
So, like, why are you doing this?
With an enemy, Tucker. Tucker, you may not like the answer. You may not like the answer, but
no, but it's just dumb. I mean, working with an enemy, Russia's our enemy.
What's dumb is that
really. So every president who met with Russia is committing treason.
A president who went over to Helsinki, had a private meeting, agreed to turn over a U.S. ambassador to an enemy, and sided with them over our own intelligence committee. At what point do you draw a line and say that's not a U.S. president? Okay. That's just the prime minister of Russia defending the president of Russia. At what point do you say that?
So you think that the president is more loyal to Russia than the United? I mean, I guess I would just remind you that you're a member of Congress. You're not supposed to talk like a child or make reckless accusations or say things
Tucker,
you don't understand or encourage people to commit violence. No, I'm just shocked that you're talking like this. I mean, you don't like the president because you think he's irresponsible.
Do you want it to be led by somebody who is siding with the Russians over the United States?
Settle down, son. I'm older than you are. Don't call into question my love of the country, please. Come on now.
Tucker, please.
Let's have a conversation.
Private conversation with a dictator. Agreed to turn over a U.S. ambassador. Sided with them over our own intelligence.
Let's just stop for 1 second.
Yeah.
You think it is treasonous for an American president to meet privately with the head of state who we don't get along with? Is that what you're saying?
I think it's a betrayal of the United States to side with Russia over our own intelligence community, to agree to turn over a U.S. ambassador to Russia who is innocent, knowing what the fate of that
So let me ask you this. Should the president meet with the leader of China? Obviously, a dictatorship kills its political enemies, practices censorship, actually has a great deal of censorship it inflicts on American companies. Should he meet with the Chinese premier, or would that be treason as well?
If we're going to get something out of it. We didn't get anything out of it.
No, hold on. So you're saying it is okay because a lot of your constituents get money from China, as we know. I mean, you represent the Bay Area. China pumps a lot of money into...
Don't insult the Bay Area.
I'm not insulting the Bay Area. I'm from the Bay Area.
Yeah.
I'm noting a fact, which is China makes a lot of your constituents rich. China's a more repressive country than Russia. Russia doesn't censor the internet the way that China does. Yeah. I mean, let's just be real. But you don't have any problem with that at all, do you? All the freedom stuff doesn't mean squat to you, does it?
No, let's focus on the country that attacked us and the president who met with that dictator right after those indictments came down.
What about the Saudis? Are you cool with us meeting with the Saudis? They behead people, they kill gays. You okay with that? They don't let women drive up until recently. Yeah. That's okay with you, though.
Tucker, I think I see why you want to distract from the president and what he did yesterday.
I'm trying to know what the rules are here.
Tucker, tell me why you're okay with it. Tell me why you're okay with what the president did yesterday, because I don't understand why you are.
Meeting with Putin? Because Putin is one of the most powerful leaders in the world militarily.
Are you okay with what he said, that he sided with Putin? Are you okay with that?
He is skeptical of American intelligence reports that don't explain their conclusions.
Don't give me the talking points, Tucker. Were you okay with him?
That's how I feel
siding with Russia? Were you okay with him siding
with Russia? I'm never okay with an American official siding with the foreign government over our own.
Are you okay with him turning a U.S. ambassador over to Russia?
With American leaders meeting with heads of state we disagree with.
Are you okay with him
accuse
turning
you
a
of
U.S.
being
ambassador?
A traitor if you met with the Saudis or the Chinese or indeed with Putin. I would like to interview Putin. Does that make me a traitor?
What about turning over Ambassador McFaul to the Russians? What do you think about that? They didn't deny that today at the press conference. That is so disturbing. Do you have an opinion on that?
Okay. Yeah, I'm sorry.
It sounds like you don't.
We've kind of run out of time for DNC talking points, but I would urge you to stop using the term treason because I think it's mindless, and I also think it's irresponsible.
I'm using the president's definition, just the president's definition.
Well, okay. Thank you, Congressman. Good to see you.
My pleasure.
Dave Rubin reports, hosts the Rubin Report on YouTube, which is excellent, and he joins us tonight. So, Dave, the problem I have with the rhetoric is that it makes any kind of intelligent conversation impossible. I do think that there are real issues at the heart of the Putin-Trump summit, and you can have whatever view you want on them, but they seem like they're worth discussing. The second you start calling people traitors, accusing them of a felony, how can you talk those issues through?
Yeah, well, first off, it's always good to be with you, Tucker, you racist, homophobic Nazi, you. So
it's unbelievable.
On that note, yes, the rhetoric on both sides, but particularly the left, has been ramped up to a point where we're basically getting to the place where we will be excusing violence if it's not excused already.
Yes.
And this mob mentality that we've talked about a bunch of times before, it's spreading everywhere. And I did a video a couple months back how internet culture is becoming mainstream culture. The trolling and attacking and fighting that used to be relegated just to the sort of basement of the internet is now leaking out everywhere, and our politicians are now telling people to troll people at their homes and dox people and all of this awful stuff. I mean, just a great sort of simple example that I can give you is when I was on the car ride over here tonight to do this show, a Hollywood director, actor, producer, great guy who I know, who's a lefty, who you would disagree with on a ton of stuff, a guy by the name of Mark Duplass, who's a great guy who I've had on my show, who's been reaching across the aisle trying to say to the liberals and the left, you know, guys, let's try to be a little more tolerant. He put out a tweet basically saying, you know, you might want to follow conservative Ben Shapiro. He's a decent guy, and maybe it'll open up your eyes to some stuff. I'm paraphrasing, basically. The amount of hate that he got caused the guy to delete the tweet because the mob just goes after anyone that dares say, let's be tolerant. And if that's really where we're at right now, then yeah, what you've been talking about on this show for quite some time about this all escalating to violence, if we can't talk, then the only thing left is violence. And I'm doing everything I can to avoid that. I think you're trying to do it. And I think there's a bunch of other people trying to do it too. And we've just got to get louder and keep showing people that that's truly the answer here.
I hate violence. And if you ever hear me excusing it, I hope you call me on it because it's wrong. Dave, thank you.
I promise you I will.
Good. Please do. Rand Paul may be one of the very few lawmakers on either side who sees value in the president meeting with Vladimir Putin. Is he a traitor too? He joins us to answer that question next. Former CIA Director John Brennan is describing the president's summit with Vladimir Putin as, quote, treason. That seems a little over the top, and yet amazingly, many otherwise responsible people have raced to endorse that assessment. We asked the president about it in Helsinki, and here's what he said.
Well, I think Brennan's a very bad guy, and if you look at it, a lot of things happened under his watch. I think he's a very bad person.
Someone who does not think that the president's meeting with Putin is treason is Senator Rand Paul of Kentucky, and he joins us tonight in the studio. Senator, thanks a lot for coming on.
Glad to be here.
So the former director of the CIA, you think of that as a sober-minded person, a responsible person, kind of a James Bond with maybe an advanced degree. Here you have a naked partisan nutcake describing a press conference as treason. How should that make us feel as American citizens?
It makes me wonder whether he should be getting a government pension if he's going to be disrespecting the commander-in-chief, calling the president treasonous. That's about as overtop as you can imagine.
But treason is a death penalty offense. He's describing views he disagrees with.
Well, yeah.
Is disagreeing with someone's opinion the same as betraying the country?
Well, you have to realize John Brennan started his illustrious career by voting for the Communist Party. You know, that's who he wanted to win the presidency back in the 70s, so he voted for the Communist Party. When he came to be head of the CIA, I filibustered him because I thought he was bad news from the very beginning. And I think what you've seen is, and what should worry us all is, this is one of the most powerful people in the world. Who has the ability to destroy anybody in the world and gain information on anything you do, any American, any foreigner? The head of the CIA. And yet, with all that power, he was coming to work each day with a bias and a hatred of the president. It should worry us all. You know, what other things could he possibly have been doing with that power? So I'm a big believer that we need more checks and balances on those in the intelligence community. James Comey, John Brennan, James Clapper. We need much more surveillance of the watchers.
It's just such an irresponsible thing to say. Look, it's not a defense of the president or any figure to say accusing someone of treason is a very big deal. You kind of wish the Congress were exercising its oversight role more aggressively. I know you're trying. I want to ask you about Montenegro. A consensus has formed in Washington today that America has a moral obligation to protect the territorial integrity of Montenegro. If Montenegro is attacked, Americans have, again, a moral obligation to die to protect Montenegro. Do you think that we do?
No, and here's what people who have talked about NATO expansion have said. They have said, when you add Montenegro, does that add to our national security, or does it actually increase our strategic risk of war? And I think it's more the latter, that when you add a Montenegro or an Albania, or actually we have a resolution before us in Congress right now that I've been opposing that says that anybody in the world who wants to join NATO, anyone who is qualified, can. That means we could have 50, 60 countries. That means we could have Equatorial Guinea in there. And if Mali attacks Equatorial Guinea, somehow we're going to have a world war.
Who would back something that lunatic?
Well, we had a vote, and I tried to strip out the any aspirant could join NATO, and I lost 20-1. Every member of the Foreign Relations Committee voted against my amendment, and all my amendment would have done was strip out the section that says that we invite any aspirant to join NATO.
Do you believe that the average American has any idea that we are obligated by treaty to protect countries that nobody in America can find on a map? Do people know that?
Nobody knows that. And here's the interesting thing, and this is where the president gets it and nobody in Washington does. People in Washington are unified that everybody should be in NATO. The whole world should be in NATO, even if there were former Soviet satellites. They want to put them in NATO, oblivious of the fact that that could get us involved in World War III. But if you come to Kentucky or you go to Tennessee and you ask average Republicans, average Democrats, do you think we should put every country in NATO and defend every country in the world? Most people would say, hell no, I don't believe that.
Because it's insane. Senator, thank you for bringing this to public attention. We should at least have a debate on it. And I know that you're trying to force one. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, a U.S. territory has authorized the seizure of guns from private citizens. They said that would never happen. Well, it is happening. One congressman is paying close attention and is trying to end it. He joins us next. Just before Hurricane Irma last year, the governor of the U.S. Virgin Islands, Kenneth Mapp, issued a remarkable and disturbing executive order that authorized the seizure of private guns and ammunition from citizens on the islands. The hurricane has been over for nearly a year, but Mapp has continued to renew that order, setting the precedent that Virgin Islands residents can have their weapons seized by the government at will any time. Why is this happening in a territory controlled by the United States? Some lawmakers are asking that question. Congressman Bob Matt represents Utah. He is the chairman of the National Resources Committee, which oversees U.S. territories, and he joins us tonight. Mr. Chairman, thank you very much for coming on. This seems like something that couldn't happen in any place controlled by the United States, and yet it is. Why?
Well, it ought not to happen. And in fact, ironically enough, after Katrina hit in New Orleans, the mayor tried to do that same kind of executive order. Eventually, the courts ruled that was blatantly unconstitutional. So this is the question. And the governor has said different things about it. He did issue the order that would have allowed them to confiscate weapons and ammunition, and it says also other property in the law. I don't know how you define that one. But he's also said he never intended to do it. This was merely a way of getting his National Guard to get ammunition and guns without using the normal procurement system. I don't know what that means. So what it does mean is that our committee, and we are sending a letter with Chairman
Russia with a couple of guns and a fancy leather jacket. But today she was wearing an orange jumpsuit and she pled not guilty to charges of acting as an agent of a foreign government. She's going to be held in jail. The judge says that she has no ties to America and therefore she is a serious flight risk, saying that she could hop into any Russian diplomatic vehicle and she would be out of their hands. So the prosecutors say that this 29-year-old allegedly offered to have sex with an unnamed individual in return for a job in the United States, and that she gained access to an extensive network of U.S. persons to influence political activities in the United States by living with and at one point, and none of the people in this picture are implicated in this, so let's take them off the camera, but there is a suggestion that she had a relationship with an individual and may have moved in with someone in order to gain access as well. So here is Jack Barsky, former KGB agent, on the story last night when I asked him if he believed that she is indeed a Russian spy. Is she a spy, what we would call a spy?
I would think so, albeit most likely an amateur. Calling her an amateur, I also have to compliment her because she got a lot further than I, as a trained professional, got. I mean, she made contact with a whole lot of people that are and would be of interest to Russia.
So that, of course, is what spies try to do. Remember Anna Chapman, who even kind of looks a little bit like Maria Butina, and the ring of Russian spies who were caught back in 2010. Their story was the basis for the series The Americans. Michael Isikoff is the chief investigative correspondent at Yahoo News and co-author of Russian Roulette. Michael, welcome back to the program. You wrote about Maria Butina in your book. Were you surprised to hear that she had been arrested?
Not really. I mean, Maria Butina, by the way, is how it's pronounced,
Thank you.
has been on my radar screen and a number of others for quite some time. During the 2016 campaign, she kept showing up at various events. She was photographed with Scott Walker at a NRA event shortly after he announced. And also, we do write about this in declared his candidacy for president. She showed up at an event. He was speaking out in Las Vegas. Trump called on her during a Q&A session, and she asked about what his position would be.
Let me just jump in for 1 second because we can show that. Let's play that.
Sure.
Do you want to continue the politics of sanctions that are damaging of both economy?
I believe I would get along very nicely with Putin, okay? And I mean where we have the strength. I don't think you'd need the sanctions. I think that we would get along very, very well.
I mean, she was clearly doing her job. She was getting her picture taken with whoever she could.
Right. And look, Russia sanctions was hardly at the forefront of the American political dialogue at that moment. That's not what Republican candidates were talking much about. But she got Trump on the record saying he'd do away with sanctions. That was something
President
very
Obama was
important
pressing
to the Kremlin.
sanctions at that point, right?
Well, he had already imposed sanctions, and there's Trump saying, if you elect me, you wouldn't need the sanctions.
All right, let's talk a little bit about the back channels that she was trying to establish and whether or not, from your reporting, she was able to really get anywhere with that. And part of the investigation is whether or not there was funneling of money. I mean, in my mind, she's sort of like the human expression of, of a bot or a tweet or all of the other efforts that they made. She's a much more traditional expression of that. In fact, over the last, decade, they've arrested 20 spies who have been doing exactly what she was trying to do.
Right. Look, she was, as we write in the book, I mean, she surprised a lot of people because she kept showing up at NRA conventions, at CPAC conferences, at national prayer breakfasts. There were a number of people who kept wondering, why is this woman always here? What is she after? There's a Republican lobbyist who she was sort of coming on to, and this lobbyist was wondering, what's going on here? Why is this Russian woman, trying to befriend me and being so solicitous
I wonder why.
of what I have to say.
I wonder what she might possibly want. Oh, my gosh. Yeah.
But look, there's a serious part to this story, and that is her handler, her boss, and that's that guy, Alexander Torshin. He is a Russian central banker, deputy governor, was a high-level official in the Duma in Putin's party, and an accused money launderer. The Spanish National Police had wiretaps on him talking to the head of a Russian organized crime gang leader in Spain, in which the leader is talking about him as El Padrino. Torshin is the real target here. Yeah. He's the guy you got to look for.
He's the guy in the picture that we're showing right now next to her. Michael, thank you. Good to see you tonight.
Sure enough. Anytime.
So New Jersey Senator Bob Menendez has been plagued by scandal, and now his New Jersey Senate race is looking like it could actually become a toss-up. And 58 concert goers massacred, hundreds of people injured, and now Mandalay Bay is turning the tables on the Las Vegas victims. One of the survivors is up next.
They have no interest whatsoever in the victims. They haven't, well, their number one and only priority is their money.
58 people were murdered and more than 500 were injured in the Las Vegas massacre last October. And now more than 1,000 survivors of the deadliest shooting in American history are being sued by MGM Resorts. The strange twist is sparking a major backlash. Is this heartless or practical, or maybe both? Jonathan Hunt is live in our West Coast newsroom with the story. Hi, Jonathan.
Hey, Martha, it certainly seems odd on the face of it that the company would sue victims, but it's all about MGM protecting itself from what could potentially be a series of devastating financial claims. The company says it has, quote, no liability of any kind to defendants. Those defendants being some of the hundreds of people who were shot, wounded, and traumatized that terrible night when a gunman opened fire from the Mandalay Bay. MGM cites a 2002 federal act that gives liability to protection to any company that uses, quote, anti-terrorism technology or services that can, quote, help prevent and respond to mass violence. MGM says it's protected from liability because it used a security company certified by the Department of Homeland Security. And in a statement, MGM added, quote, years of drawn-out litigation and hearings are not in the best interest of victims, the community, and those still healing. Now, the act MGM is relying on here was passed in the wake of the 9/11 terror attacks. The FBI has not called the Vegas shootings an act of terrorism, and in fact still hasn't found a motive behind the massacre. Victims and their lawyers are outraged.
Who was once the West's biggest investor in Russia, now after fighting to escape the clutches of Vladimir Putin, fears that he may become part of some kind of exchange underway for 12 Russian intel agents.
Brought his huge arsenal of weapons into the Mandalay Bay, MGM should have seen the warning signs and should not be protected legally by that 2002 Federal Safety Act.
We can let them into the country and they will be present to this question. Then we would expect that the Americans would reciprocate and we can bring up Mr. Browder in this particular case.
All the bells and whistles are going off
that
they didn't catch.
Now, the courts will decide the legal issues. The court of public opinion, Martha, seems to have ruled already against MGM.
That could be damaging as well. Thank you very much, Jonathan. Brian Claypool, an attorney who was there the night of the massacre. He represents more than 75 of the survivors. And Mark Eiglarsh, a criminal defense attorney and former prosecutor. Gentlemen, welcome, both of you. Mark, you were there. We talked shortly after that night about how horrific it was for you. How does MGM turn lawsuits against these victims and get away with it?
Hey, Martha, thanks for having me back. Yeah, we talked right after the shooting, and I will tell you that the announcement of these lawsuits against the victims of the Vegas shooting has re-victimized and re-traumatized everybody that was part of that shooting, including myself. And my question to MGM is, how deep into this swamp do they want to go by suing victims? I mean, how low do they want to kick the victims? In my opinion, both as a victim of the shooting and a lawyer, and actually I'm co-counseling with Robert Eglett on these cases, I mean, this is a bullying tactic and an intimidation tactic, Martha, to dissuade or discourage these victims from filing this lawsuit, plain and simple. And they didn't have to do this.
Mark, I can understand if MGM thinks that, they can win this suit, but suing the victims, what are they suing them for?
A PR nightmare. I will not defend them on PR grounds at all. My heart goes out to the victims, and I can understand why Brian and the others are feeling angry. However, Brian, as a tremendous trial lawyer, knows that your job when you're defending someone is to do everything you possibly can to win. And in this particular case, they cite a statute that seems to be created for this very scenario. They didn't hire Justin Bieber's bodyguards or a couple of Hell's Angels. They hired a company that was certified by the Department of Homeland Security in the exact acts that are protected underneath this statute. I'm not sure how a judge doesn't grant this.
All right, but let me ask you this, because after this horrific night, we talked about the security that other casinos have in place in Las Vegas. And the Wynn Casino, as I remember, had some much tougher security in terms of what you can bring into those rooms and how long you can let them, no one enter your room for days and days. So if you can prove that, can you prove, Brian, that they were negligent because other resorts have handled it much better?
You can do that, and you can also, the way we're going to do it also is, for example, a couple weeks ago, there was evidence of 3 years ago, a convicted felon is in the hotel room at the Mandalay Bay. with mass weapons. So we can use prior reports of crime at all the MGM casinos and try to get in evidence of other crimes.